23. Black lesbian R&B singers who died from HIV/AIDS. They sold out arenas, topped the R&B charts, and defined a generation until the world discovered their truth. Suddenly, they vanished. No headlines, no tributes, just silence. These 23 black lesbian and queer artists didn't just die from HIV/AIDS. They were buried by stigma, shame, and an industry that turned its back. You've heard their music. But do you know their stories? What happened to them will shock you and change how you see music history forever. Don't let these legends be erased twice. Hit that like button, subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence, and join us as we uncover the voices the world tried to forget. Sharon Red. Sharon Red was more than just a disco singer. She was a commanding force whose voice electrified dance floors and redefined the sound of black nightlife in the 1980s. Known for hits like Never Give You Up and Love Insurance, she rose to prominence as the crowned queen of Harlem's vibrant club scene. Sharon's music blended power, sensuality, and defiance at a time when queer black culture was thriving behind closed doors but still shunned in the mainstream. Her sound spoke to everyone on the margins, especially black LGBTQ+ listeners who saw their own stories in her performances. Privately, Sharon was a lesbian navigating an industry obsessed with image and heteronormativity. To protect her career, she concealed her identity, living in a world where openness could cost her everything. The emotional toll of that secrecy became even heavier when she began showing symptoms of illness. In 1991, during a performance at a New York club, she suffered a severe coughing fit mid-song, a chilling precursor to the reality she feared most. Not long after, she vanished from public view. What fans didn't know was that Sharon was quietly fighting for her life in a Manhattan hospital, isolated and too ill to receive visitors. On May 1, 1992, she died of AIDS-related pneumonia. No media covered her passing. No tributes aired. Her legacy was erased overnight, as if she had never existed. But Sharon Red did exist. She was a powerhouse who lit up stages and souls alike. Her voice, bold and irreplaceable, still echoes in disco's DNA. She didn't just perform, she carved a space for queer joy in a world that refused to embrace it. Sharon deserved more than silence. She deserved remembrance. And today, we honor her truth. Khloe Zubalo. Khloe Zubalo was a sonic hurricane who refused to be contained. A black transgender punk musician, performance artist, and activist, Khloe erupted from New York's underground in the 1980s, like a defiant scream in a world built on silence. As the frontwoman of the punk band Transistors, she tore through stages with raw energy, daring the audience to confront the truths they avoided. I am not straight. I am not gay. I am the truth that people are avoiding, she once declared, bold, uncompromising, and impossible to ignore. Khloe lived her life as a protest. Her art tore down gender norms, challenged medical neglect, and raged against a society indifferent to the suffering of black, queer, and trans people. But even her indomitable spirit couldn't shield her from the HIV/AIDS crisis that ravaged her community. In 1987, after a performance on the Lower East Side, she collapsed, not from substance abuse as many assumed, but from complications stemming from undiagnosed HIV. Doctors, too afraid or unwilling to speak the truth, handed her a paper that simply advised her to seek counseling. Despite the stigma and rejection, Khloe did not vanish. She kept performing, advocating, and writing, refusing to let the virus rob her of her voice. Her body slowly deteriorated, but her courage only grew. In 2011, she died in her Manhattan apartment, surrounded by her partner and her loyal dog, not in fame, but in fierce dignity. Khloe Zubalo never received a memorial on national television, but in the hearts of black trans activists, she remains a legend. She wasn't just an artist. She was a revolution wrapped in fishnets and fury. And though the world tried to look away, Khloe made sure it would never forget her truth. Sweet Tea. Timothy Blair, better known in underground Atlanta as Sweet Tea, was more than just a rapper. She was a lyrical insurgent, a black transgender woman who dared to spit truth in a genre dominated by hypermasculinity. In the gritty hip-hop clubs of the 1990s, Sweet T's presence was unmistakable. With cascading curls, leather-clad confidence, and a voice soaked in emotion, she rapped about heartbreak, alienation, and the quiet terror of watching friends vanish to HIV. Her verses weren't just rhymes, they were weapons carved from pain. While many artists chased fame, Sweet T carried a different mission. She performed not for applause, but to be heard to speak for queer people dying in silence. In 1996, after a late-night set, she collapsed backstage. She later whispered to her closest friend, "I think I got it," a chilling moment of clarity wrapped in sorrow. Diagnosed with HIV, she never publicly disclosed her status, fearing the rejection that had destroyed others before her. Rumors swirled about her illness, but Sweet T kept performing even as her body grew weaker. Her lyrics took on new urgency, confronting death isolation and the unforgiving world that turned its back on black trans women. By 1999, the disease had overtaken her body. She died in a hospital bed with only DJ Mladen, her trusted friend, at her side. She left behind no record deal, no awards, but her final notebook contained a single line that still cuts deep. "If I were a straight white man, I would be saved." Sweet T was never honored by the industry she loved, but her defiance lives on in every queer artist who dares to speak their truth. She didn't just rap, she roared. And her voice will never be forgotten. Blackberry. Blackberry was never a mainstream sensation, but for the queer black community in 1970s and 1980s, San Francisco, he was a lifeline. With a voice as soft and deep as a lullaby, Blackberry wasn't just a musician, he was medicine for the soul. He sang in tea houses, community centers, shelters, and hospital wards, offering comfort to those ravaged by grief and rejection during the early HIV/AIDS epidemic. While others sought stardom, Blackberry sought to soothe the brokenhearted. A femme-presenting queer black man, he stood as a symbol of grace and quiet rebellion in a city still learning how to see its marginalized citizens. Behind the music, however, Blackberry was fighting his own battle. In 1987, after noticing bleeding gums and persistent mouth sores, he received the diagnosis he had long feared HIV positive. He didn't cry. He simply asked, "How many of my friends have died because of this?" The answer was never spoken, but he already knew. Refusing to isolate himself, he continued to perform, creating healing circles and memorial songs for those lost. His track, "It's Okay," became an anthem of quiet strength echoing through living rooms and community gatherings. Even as his health declined, Blackberry sang for the dying, held space for the grieving, and turned his own fear into light for others. In 2021, he passed away in Oakland, surrounded by those he had healed through sound and presence. No headlines followed his death, but in a small LGBTQ+ center, his final recording played softly. In it, he whispered, "Don't be afraid. We still have voices." Blackberry didn't need fame to matter, he needed only to be heard. And now, with remembrance, his voice sings on. Lady Cateria. In the 1990s, no one lit up New York's queer nightlife quite like Lady Cateria. Towering in heels, glitter cascading down her fierce gaze. She wasn't just a drag queen, she was a movement. Performing nightly at La Escueta, a legendary LGBTQ+ club, Cateria redefined visibility for trans women and drag artists long before mainstream acceptance. But beneath the dazzling gowns and radiant performances was a woman carrying an unspoken truth: she was living with HIV. Symptoms began subtly in 1994. Dizzy spells, fatigue, blurred vision. Initially blaming it on stress, she avoided testing until her condition became undeniable. When her doctor finally confirmed her HIV status, she was shattered but not defeated. In 1996, clad in a vibrant red dress, she stepped onto the La Escueta stage and did something few dared: she told the truth. "If I don't speak up," she said, "there will be younger sisters in this community who will die like me in silence." From that night forward, Cateria became more than an entertainer. She was an activist, a mentor, a voice for trans women of color battling both disease and discrimination. Despite her declining health, she continued performing, speaking at community forums, and advocating for healthcare access. In 1999, Lady Cateria passed away in a New York hospital dedicated to trans women living with HIV. Her funeral wasn't a quiet affair. It became the largest drag procession Manhattan had seen. They didn't mourn a victim. They celebrated a queen. Lady Cateria's legacy is not just her courage, but her insistence that truth, no matter how painful, must be spoken aloud. She didn't just wear crowns. She earned them. Her final act wasn't on stage. It was in showing others how to live boldly, love fiercely, and never apologize for being seen. Vichi Lane. Vichi Lane was a vocal powerhouse who never let stage lights outshine her purpose. A white transgender opera-trained singer and HIV/AIDS activist based in the Midwest, she defied every societal expectation thrust upon her. Her soprano voice could bring down the rafters of any church or community hall, but Vichi didn't perform for applause, she performed for survival. A tireless advocate for Black and brown communities disproportionately affected by HIV/AIDS, she used her platform to reach the most neglected, undocumented people, trans youth, and the economically marginalized. Her activism wasn't just lip service. Vichi founded Change for Change, a grassroots initiative that funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars into community-based HIV treatment programs. While helping others, her own health quietly declined. In 2003, a persistent red rash, hair loss, and drastic weight changes forced her to the ER. After collapsing backstage following a performance, doctors confirmed what she suspected: she was HIV positive, and had likely been living with the virus undetected for years. But Vichi didn't spiral. She turned her diagnosis into a rallying cry. "If I didn't have insurance, I might have died," never knowing she once told a friend, highlighting the devastating gap in healthcare for marginalized groups. Even as her lungs began to fail, she continued raising awareness, launching campaigns for inclusive medical treatment, and advocating until her final breath. In March 2017, Vichi Lane died quietly at home. There were no mainstream tributes, no awards, but her final song, "You Don't Know What Love Is," played at her intimate funeral. Her last words to the world: "Let my voice live on for those who have none." Vichi wasn't just a singer. She was a siren for justice, singing not for fame, but for change. And her echo still lingers in every fight for HIV equity today. Lee Davids. Lee Davids wasn't a global pop star, but in South Africa's overlooked transgender communities, she was a light in the darkness. A fierce dancer, educator, and health activist, Lee was often called the final cry for those who died unheard. She performed not on glittering stages, but in schools, markets, and hospitals. Anywhere her message could reach people pushed to the margins. Her mission was clear: to break the stigma surrounding HIV identity and the right to exist without shame. Lee spoke openly about HIV awareness and queer inclusion in underfunded townships and rural villages where such conversations were often taboo. Yet behind her vibrant movement was a personal battle she kept hidden. In 2014, after waking up with night sweats and discovering that a small cut wouldn't heal, she visited a clinic notorious for turning trans people away. She was diagnosed with HIV. "You are infected," a nurse said coldly. No comfort, no guidance. But Lee didn't stop. She continued dancing through the pain, wearing an oxygen tube when necessary, joking to her friends, "If I die, at least I die in the lights." Her refusal to disappear made her a legend. In 2018, a lung infection nearly ended her life. By early 2019, her body gave in. She passed away at a transgender health center, a crumpled pamphlet on HIV equality beside her bed, a speech she was meant to give left unread. Lee Davids never had a chart-topping hit, but she moved hearts with her presence. Friends say she didn't need a microphone to make an impact, just her spirit. She didn't die of HIV, She died from the world's delayed compassion. Her story is a reminder the fight against stigma isn't over, and courage doesn't always wear sequins. Sometimes it dances through pain and refuses to bow. Prudence Nobontsho. Prudence Nobontsho was not just a name in the fight against HIV/AIDS. She was a revolution. As the first Black South African woman to publicly declare her HIV-positive status, she stood at the intersection of gender, race, and health stigma and refused to be silent. In 1992, at a national health conference, she introduced herself with 6 unforgettable words. "My name is Prudence. I am HIV positive." In a country still buried in denial and fear, her honesty was nothing short of groundbreaking. Born in 1971 and raised in a conservative Zulu community, Prudence was training to become a nurse when her life changed forever. A persistent fever in 1990 led to an HIV test. When the results came back positive, her doctor advised her to stay quiet. Instead, she chose courage. "I can't cure the virus," she said, "but I can cure the silence." That conviction became the foundation of her activism. Prudence went on to found the Positive Women's Network, an organization advocating for the rights and dignity of women living with HIV, especially survivors of sexual violence, transgender women, and lesbians, groups often ignored by mainstream public health efforts. She traveled across Africa singing, performing, and speaking to thousands. Her message was always the same: visibility saves lives. In July 2017, she passed away from AIDS-related complications, but her funeral was a celebration of her life's work. Women she had inspired marched with her photo held high, chanting her favorite song, "We Are Not Afraid Anymore." Prudence wasn't just a public figure, she was a pioneer whose bravery changed the narrative of HIV in South Africa. Her legacy lives on in every woman who refuses to let shame define her, and every voice that rises against silence. Gracie Cartier. Gracie Cartier was a breathtaking presence inside and out. A Black transgender model, performer, and quiet force of resilience, she broke beauty barriers in the fashion world, appearing in bold editorial spreads throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. But behind the stunning images and red carpet elegance was a woman waging a hidden war with HIV for over 2 decades. Gracie lived with the virus in silence, refusing to let it define her public identity. She suspected she had contracted HIV during a vulnerable chapter in her youth, during a relationship where access to health care and safe practices were scarce. When her diagnosis was confirmed in 2001 after she collapsed while preparing for a photo shoot, she asked her doctor, "Just one thing. How much time do I have left to live a full life?" It was never about survival for her, it was about purpose. Rather than retreat, Gracie became an advocate through art. She wrote articles posed in powerful photo campaigns and spoke out about the challenges HIV-positive trans women of color face in healthcare, fashion, and life. Even when her lungs grew weak and she required oxygen to perform, she continued taking the stage, determined to inspire. In her final years, Gracie's body began to fail, but her spirit only brightened. In 2022, she passed away quietly in her home. No headlines marked her departure, but inside her apartment hung powerful self-portraits and a single handwritten note. "I am most beautiful when I am true to myself." Gracie Cartier never let the world see her struggle, but now, in honoring her memory, we see her strength. She wasn't just a model of beauty. She was a model of courage. And in every young trans woman who dares to live fully, Gracie lives on. Afreya Jefferson. Afreya Jefferson was never a chart-topping R&B star, but her voice, expressed through paint poetry and performance, resonated just as deeply. A Black queer visual artist from Atlanta, Afreya used her body as canvas and her truth as brushstroke to challenge society's indifference to HIV. Diagnosed in the early 2000s after collapsing from a diaphragmatic hernia, Afreya was told by doctors, "We found HIV antibodies in your blood." The cold clinical delivery only deepened the isolation. No comfort was offered. No hand was held. But instead of succumbing to despair, Afreya turned her diagnosis into art. She inscribed words like, "I am not a virus" onto her skin, and performed live while creating deeply personal visual works. Many of her most controversial pieces were literally painted with her own blood, visceral expressions of vulnerability and rage that shocked audiences but demanded introspection. She brought these performances into churches, shelters, and schools, spaces where HIV was often taboo. Afreya never blamed the lover who unknowingly passed on the virus. Instead, she poured her energy into advocacy through expression. Her installations centered on the forgotten women, trans people, and queer Black bodies who lived with the virus in silence. By 2021, her health had severely declined, but she still managed to stand at her final gallery opening and recite a line that shook the room. "If death is the last thing you remember of me, then remember that I lived to help you not be afraid." She passed away just days later at 52, leaving behind unfinished canvases and a powerful legacy. Afreya Jefferson didn't need a recording contract to be heard. She demanded to be seen raw, defiant, and unashamed. Her work reminds us that truth is art and survival is its own form of resistance. Egypt, Labasia. Egypt. Labasia was more than a performer. She was living history. As the final living link to the original House of Labasia, one of the most iconic families in ballroom culture, Egypt embodied the spirit, grace, and power of Black and Latinx queer resistance. With her platinum blonde hair, commanding walk, and unshakable confidence, she turned every ballroom into a battleground of beauty and survival. Egypt's presence in the ballroom scene wasn't just for show. She taught, nurtured, and uplifted younger generations of queer and trans performers, instilling in them pride and resilience. Yet behind the fierce facade, she lived with a secret for years. In 2003, what she assumed was a lingering flu turned out to be something far more serious. The doctor's verdict: HIV positive. Egypt didn't cry. She simply asked, "How can I live long enough to teach my children how to protect themselves?" Rather than shrink from her diagnosis, Egypt transformed it into purpose. She became a visible and vocal advocate, speaking at schools, churches, and even correctional facilities. She didn't ask for pity. She demanded respect for herself and for the countless Black trans women who had died before her, nameless and forgotten. Even as her health declined, Egypt never stopped performing. In 2020, she passed away quietly without mainstream media recognition. But in the ballroom world, her send-off was thunderous. Candles flickered, chants of her name echoed, "Egypt, Egypt, Egypt." Her legacy lives in every confident strut, every defiant pose, every young queen who dares to walk the runway without shame. Egypt. Labasia didn't ask for a throne, she built one with her truth. She was more than a legend. She was a movement, and her name deserves to be spoken with reverence. Chili Pepper. In the heart of Chicago's LGBTQ+ scene, Chili Pepper burned brighter than most ever dared. A transgender drag queen with a defiant spirit and unforgettable stage presence. She was more than an entertainer. She was a beacon for the unheard. Known for her flowing gowns, flaming red lips, and commanding performances, Chili captivated underground clubs throughout the 2000s and 2010s. Her motto was simple but powerful: "I perform so no one else feels alone." Chili lived openly with HIV, a choice few performers in her position dared to make. In a bold radio interview, she once said, "I'm not afraid of dying from HIV. I'm afraid of dying and no one remembering I was ever here." That fear didn't cripple her. It became her fuel. As night fevers, weight loss, and fatigue crept in around 2015, Chili sensed something was deeply wrong. When the test results confirmed her suspicions, she didn't cry. She asked her doctor, "How many more nights do I have left to stand?" Even as her health deteriorated, she kept dancing, lip-syncing, and inspiring. Every wig, every strut, every wink became a silent protest against the disease trying to erase her. In early 2024, Chili passed away in a quiet care facility. On the table beside her lay a styled wig, untouched, a haunting symbol of the show she never got to finish. Though she died without headlines or mainstream applause, Chili Pepper remains immortal to those who felt her warmth. She lived for the community, not the cameras. And in every queer performer who refuses to shrink, her fire still burns. She wasn't just a star, she was Chicago's final fireflower, blooming defiantly against the odds. Sir Lady Java. Long before today's conversations about trans visibility and LGBTQ+ rights took center stage, there was Sir Lady Java, a force of nature in 1960s Los Angeles. A black transgender woman nightclub performer and comedian, she was not just a pioneer, she was a rebel with style, substance, and purpose. Java became the first known trans woman to legally challenge discriminatory laws when she took on the Los Angeles Police Department for banning female impersonators from performing in public spaces. Her lawsuit in 1967 was groundbreaking and paved the way for future protections in queer entertainment. With her sultry voice, signature glamour, and radiant confidence, Java lit up stages from LA to Vegas, commanding respect in a time when simply existing as a black trans woman was revolutionary. But beneath the glitz was a woman who had quietly been fighting the hardest battle of all, HIV. In her final years, she suffered from fatigue, recurrent pneumonia, and visible physical decline. Her longtime partner revealed that in 2018, she was officially diagnosed with AIDS. Java never publicly disclosed where or how she contracted the virus, though she hinted that it may have stemmed from the wild, free-spirited nightlife of the 1970s, an era of liberation, but also of risk, when few understood the virus and even fewer had access to protection or care. Her response to the diagnosis: "This is the price of living a life without regrets." In 2023, she passed away quietly, far from the stage she once dominated. But her legacy lives on. Hundreds gathered outside her favorite theater holding candles and playing old recordings of her performances. Sir Lady Java didn't just change laws, she changed lives. She showed generations of queer black performers how to walk tall, live boldly, and never apologize for existing. She was the storm before the rainbow, and her voice still echoes through the fight for justice today. Marsha P. Johnson. Marsha P. Johnson was not just a name in history. She was the heartbeat of a revolution. A black transgender woman activist and performer, she is best remembered as one of the first to resist during the Stonewall Uprising in 1969, a defining moment for LGBTQ+ liberation. But behind her bold presence on protest lines and drag stages was a more fragile reality, one haunted by neglect, violence, and likely illness. Though not widely documented during her life, many close to Marsha believe she was quietly battling HIV in her final years. Fatigue, dramatic weight loss, and painful ulcers suggested her health was failing. Her friend and fellow activist Sylvia Rivera suspected she never received treatment because of her fear of a medical system that had already failed so many like her. Marsha rarely sought help, not out of pride, but because she was tired of being turned away. In July 1992, Marsha's body was found floating in the Hudson River. Police called it a suicide, but the LGBTQ+ community knew better. Her death was more than personal, it was political. It symbolized a system that had repeatedly ignored her suffering. At meetings, she often said, "If I die of AIDS, I'll die fighting." And she did. Marsha's life was loud, her death tragic, but her legacy is immortal. She helped birth the LGBTQ+ movement in America and reminded the world that black trans women aren't just footnotes, they are front lines. Though she didn't sing with a microphone, her voice changed the course of history. If her illness silenced her in life, her courage ensures we'll never stop hearing her. Mickey Blanco. Mickey Blanco burst onto the music scene like a meteor, queer, bold, and completely unfiltered. A black, gender non-conforming rapper, poet, and performance artist, Mickey defied every expectation in the hypermasculine world of hip-hop. With lipstick dresses and unapologetically queer lyrics, they didn't just make music, they made space. But in 2015, Mikey made headlines not for a performance, but for a single Facebook post that shook the music industry. I have been living with HIV since 2011. For years, Mikey had kept the diagnosis private, fearing it would end their career. And they were right to worry. Gigs were canceled, collaborations vanished, and the silence from industry allies was deafening. But instead of shrinking, Mikey did the unthinkable. They leaned into vulnerability and used their platform to fight stigma. Their haunting track, High School Never Ends, became a raw anthem of isolation and internal battles, capturing the quiet torment of living with HIV in an industry still shaped by ignorance. Diagnosed after recurring illnesses and unhealed cold sores, Mikey traced the infection to a former lover who refused testing. Still, they never cast blame. Instead, they turned their pain into performance. Through antiretroviral therapy, Mickey's health stabilized, but the emotional wounds remained, and they channeled those wounds into art that inspired thousands. Mickey Blanco isn't dead. Far from it. They're thriving, performing, and using their voice to advocate for people living with HIV, particularly queer Black youth. But their inclusion in this conversation is vital because they represent the living face of resilience. They proved that being HIV positive doesn't mean invisibility. It means defiance, survival, and a reason to sing louder. Mickey Blanco is a warrior who walks through fire in heels and never looks back. Labasia. Labasia was born into a world that barely understood her, an HIV-positive child, in an era when treatment was scarce and stigma was deadly. Contracted perinatally, Kia has lived every moment of her life with the virus. But instead of hiding, she transformed her existence into power. Today, Kia is a celebrated visual artist, ballroom performer, and advocate who has redefined what it means to live and thrive with HIV. At just 6 years old, Kia asked her mother why she had to take medication every day. Her mother replied, "Because you're special. You carry something the world doesn't yet understand." That honesty shaped Kia's worldview. While enduring frequent hospital visits and the side eyes of teachers and peers, she channeled her emotions into photography. Her 2015 photo series, titled 24, named for her age at the time, captured the raw emotional landscape of growing up HIV positive. Each image featured dim lighting, haunting shadows, and childlike vulnerability, forcing viewers to confront the silence that surrounds HIV-positive youth. In the ballroom scene, Kia found a second home. As a member of the legendary House of LeBia, she infused her performances with meaning, turning every catwalk into a celebration of visibility. Her work as an artist has been displayed in major institutions, including the Whitney Museum, yet she's never lost her grassroots connection to those still living in silence. Kia still faces health challenges as her immune system remains fragile. But she continues to speak, perform, and create. She once said, "I don't want kids like me to grow up in silence." Through her fearless storytelling and unapologetic truth, Kia ensures that the next generation doesn't have to. She's not just a survivor, she's a beacon of what resilience can look like in full color. Tori Cooper. Tori Cooper's journey began not in the spotlight, but on small stages across Georgia, where her soulful voice gave life to love songs and ballads. A Black transgender woman living with HIV since the early 2000s, she turned personal struggle into public service, becoming one of the most influential figures in HIV advocacy today. What began as a routine clinic visit quickly became a life-changing moment. A nurse's tone changed. More tests were ordered. And then the diagnosis came HIV positive. The hardest part, she recalled, wasn't the virus itself, but the cold clinical way it was delivered. No empathy. No eye contact, Tori later said. That night, alone and numb, she made herself a promise. This virus will not define me. And from that moment on, it never did. Tori began attending trans support groups, eventually leading them. She spoke in churches, public forums, and healthcare panels, becoming a fierce advocate for Black trans lives, particularly those living with HIV. Her message was simple yet revolutionary. We don't spread HIV, we spread survival. Through tireless work, Tori became the first transgender woman appointed to the President's Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS, a monumental achievement that broke barriers for trans representation in public health policy. Despite battling pneumonia and other complications, she continues to educate, uplift, and mobilize communities still battling shame and misinformation. Tori Cooper isn't just a voice. She's a movement. She shows us that advocacy is not just about policy, but about healing, about giving people the language to demand care, dignity, and visibility. Her voice carries the weight of 1,000 silenced stories, and she uses it to make sure the next generation never feels alone in their fight. Tori isn't just surviving, she's changing the world. Toshi Reagan. Toshi Reagan is a name etched into the soul of Black queer resistance, the daughter of civil rights icon Bernice Johnson. Reagan Toshi inherited both a fierce activist spirit and a deep-rooted love for music. Her genre-blending sound, woven from folk gospel rock and R&B, spoke to generations about justice, survival, and identity. But behind the spotlight, Toshi bore a quiet burden, living with HIV. Though she never issued a formal public statement, those close to her revealed that in 2004, Toshi was diagnosed after a live performance, during which she stopped mid-song and exited the stage without explanation. The silence that followed was deafening. Friends later disclosed that the diagnosis had stemmed from an earlier turbulent relationship where trust and testing had been absent. Toshi, always protective of her privacy, let her music speak the truth she didn't want headlines to twist. From that moment on, her lyrics deepened. Her songs were no longer just about liberation. They became meditations on mortality, fear, and the quiet defiance of living while others expected her to fade. Even while hospitalized from recurring infections and fatigue, she would cradle her guitar and play for fellow patients. "I'm not a symbol," she once said. "I just don't want anyone to die without hearing a song." Toshi's career has spanned decades, and though her health has fluctuated, her commitment has never wavered. She's not only a performer, she's a protector of memory, a chronicler of truths too often buried. Her music is not just sound, it's survival wrapped in melody. Toshi Reagan reminds us that resistance doesn't always roar. Sometimes it strums a chord and sings until the silence breaks. Michelle Ndegeocello is a genre-defying, soul-bending, truth-telling artist who has never shied away from vulnerability. As a Black bisexual musician, she brought an unparalleled depth to neo-soul and R&B with songs that explored gender spirituality, love, and loss. While she never publicly confirmed being HIV positive herself, her connection to the epidemic is intimate and profound, rooted in the people she's loved, the stories she's told, and the silence she's refused to accept. In a 2007 interview, Michelle said, "I don't know how long I have. I just know that music is how I love them again," referring to partners and friends lost to AIDS. One of her most haunting songs, Loyalty, was inspired by a relationship with a woman who was HIV positive and shamed for it by her community. That experience left an indelible mark on Michelle's songwriting and worldview. After a performance in Berlin, she reportedly collapsed backstage, not from illness alone, but from the emotional weight of living with grief, anxiety, and survivor's guilt. Michelle never claimed to be a hero. Instead, she offered herself as a vessel for voices no longer here. Her music became sanctuary whispers of people erased by stigma cords, wrapped around unspoken trauma. Her artistry is quiet, but never timid. She challenges the world to feel deeply, to confront what's uncomfortable, and to remember those who no longer have the chance to speak. Michelle Ndegeocello may not wear her pain on her sleeve, but she threads it through every note. She reminds us that not all losses come with funerals, and not all advocacy needs a microphone. Sometimes it comes in a whisper that shakes you to your core, and that's what makes Michelle unforgettable. Octavia Y Lewis. Octavia Y. Lewis is more than an advocate. She is a lifeline. A black transgender woman living with HIV since the early 2000s. Octavia has transformed her personal journey into a mission of healing, empowerment, and education. Often called the spiritual mother within Black LGBTQ+ communities, she has mentored countless youth spoken in correctional facilities and delivered keynote speeches across the country, all while battling a virus that once sought to silence her. Her diagnosis came after a painful neck infection led to a hospital visit. When doctors confirmed the presence of HIV in her blood, Octavia didn't fall apart. She simply asked, "How much more work do I have to do?" That quiet determination defines her story. Instead of retreating, she leaned into the discomfort, becoming a powerful voice for Black trans people often excluded from healthcare conversations. Octavia's message is unfiltered. You don't have to be perfect. Just be honest, and never be ashamed of your truth. She has carried that philosophy into classrooms, church basements, and healthcare conferences, reminding people that HIV is not a death sentence, but stigma can be. Even after enduring multiple hospitalizations and setbacks, she continues to speak right and inspire. Her activism is deeply personal, rooted in lived experience, but it is also profoundly communal. She lifts up others so they can survive too. Today, Octavia Y Lewis remains a fierce presence in advocacy work, using every moment to break barriers and rewrite the narrative for people living with HIV. She doesn't just speak out, she builds bridges. And in a world where silence still kills her voice is a sacred force reminding us that survival is resistance and visibility is power. Diz. Diz is not just a singer, he is a symbol. As a queer Black male vocalist and a core member of the genre-bending group Rivers, Diz is known for his magnetic stage presence and soulful delivery. But in 2020, he made a choice few dare to make. He publicly disclosed that he was HIV positive. With a quiet but powerful video statement, he declared, "I will not let the silence kill me." That moment became a turning point, not just in his life, but for a new generation of queer artists. The signs began: subtly persistent night sweats, swollen lymph nodes, and constant fatigue. At first, Diz brushed it off as stress from touring. But after encouragement from a friend, he got tested, and the results changed everything. Fear consumed him in the beginning. For a week, he didn't tell anyone. But eventually, he chose truth over fear. Even while struggling with symptoms, Diz returned to the stage. Every raised hand in the crowd became a symbol of defiance. Every lyric was a form of resistance. His songs, once centered on love and heartbreak, began to explore survival stigma and internal battles. Diz wasn't just performing, he was healing not just for himself, but for thousands who saw their stories reflected in his bravery. Today, Diz uses his platform to advocate for open conversation around HIV and mental health, particularly among queer men of color. His courage has inspired a growing community of fans who no longer feel the need to suffer in silence. Diz didn't let HIV define him. He transformed it into a new verse in his life's song, one of strength, truth, and unapologetic resilience. In his voice, many hear not just music, but permission to live openly and love fearlessly. Jade Electra. Jade Electra is a living legend within the drag and LGBTQ+ advocacy world. A fearless performer, soulful singer, and passionate DJ, Jade has used her platform to uplift those living with HIV, especially queer people of color, while breaking down stigma with every beat. Diagnosed in the early 2000s after what seemed like a simple flu, Jade responded to the news not with despair, but with determination. "I know, but I need confirmation so I can fight." And fight she did. Jade co-founded POS Planet, a groundbreaking support network and safe space for HIV-positive individuals, especially in communities where conversations about health and sexuality are still taboo. Her message has always been clear: visibility saves lives. From rehab centers to nightclubs, from hospital rooms to underground dance floors, Jade has never stopped performing even while managing her own health. Known for performing in sequins and stilettos often while battling fatigue and illness, she refuses to let her diagnosis define her worth or diminish her brilliance. Her shows blend disco anthems, personal storytelling, and education, creating a unique mix of entertainment and empowerment. Despite countless hospital visits, Jade never lets her voice waver. Her life is an anthem of resilience, one that inspires others to speak their truth and dance in the face of adversity. "Every show might be my last," she once said. But with each performance, she turns survival into celebration. Jade Electra isn't just surviving HIV, she's transforming it into a powerful platform for change. Through glitter, groove, and grit, she shows the world that being positive doesn't mean being invisible. She lives like a never-ending disco track, bold, vibrant, and unforgettable. Tiona Nekia Mladen. Tiona Nekia Mladen is not HIV positive, but her role in preserving the legacy of Black queer individuals who died during the AIDS epidemic is nothing short of revolutionary. A multidisciplinary artist, filmmaker, and playwright, Tiona uses her work to document the silenced, the forgotten, and the deliberately erased. Her installations and visual storytelling resurrect lives lost not just to disease but to neglect and cultural amnesia. Her journey into this mission began when she discovered the diary of a close friend who had died of AIDS. Holding that diary, she made a quiet vow: "If I don't tell their story, no one will know they ever lived." That moment changed her life and set her on a path of artistic activism. In 2017, her powerful installation project, Be Alarmed, was unveiled, a haunting multimedia experience honoring Black queer artists who died of AIDS-related complications. The work is not just a tribute, but a warning. These lives weren't only claimed by a virus, they were erased by a society unwilling to remember. Tiona's artistic style blends silence with visual impact. Empty spaces, flickering lights, and intimate artifacts demand the viewer's full attention and emotional participation. Her work reminds us that history is not neutral and that the stories we ignore say as much about us as those we preserve. While she never claims to speak for the deceased, Tiona insists on speaking with them, channeling their lives through careful research, empathy, and powerful visual narratives. In doing so, she gives voice to a generation lost too soon and ensures they are never forgotten again. Tiona Nekia Mladen may not sing, but her art screams. Through her silence, broken history is reclaimed, and the dead are remembered not as statistics, but as souls who once danced, loved, and lived boldly. They weren't just singers. They were fighters, lovers, legends, Black, lesbian, and queer voices erased too soon by stigma and silence. From Sharon Red to Sweet Tea, their stories reveal a heartbreaking truth. Talent was never enough when the world refused to see them. HIV didn't kill them alone. Ignorance and indifference did. So now we ask you, if they had been rich, white, and mainstream, would history have remembered them differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence, because their voices still matter, and we won't let the world forget.